As we begin this morning, I wanted to start by posing a question, and it's a question that some of you might have asked before. For me, it's one of those kind of just nagging questions, those mysteries of the universe that comes back to me every so often, and I think it's a good question to ask. The question is, why don't kids like to nap? Seriously, why don't they like if your boss came to you and they said, hey, today after lunch, and actually going forward, after lunch, what I'm gonna need you to do is just kind of take a break and go into like a dark, quiet room and just sleep for a couple hours. And when you wake up, don't worry, you'll just like come right back and be right back into, work mode and everything. But you just really need to take a nap for a couple of hours. You would kiss your boss if they like gave you that opportunity. But then like kids, they have this amazing gift and they want none of it, right? They want none of it. And of course, we know the answer, because when it's nap time, whatever a kid is doing is more urgent and important than napping, right? And it could be anything. As a staff, we've been spending some time lately with the Eisenhower decision matrix. Are you guys familiar with the Eisenhower decision matrix? So I don't know if this, oh, wait, now it's working. All right. So the Eisenhower decision matrix, it has kind of these two continuums of urgent and important, and you have the stuff that's both urgent and important. That's the stuff like you do, because like there's a sense of urgency, and it's really important. You have the stuff that's neither urgent nor important, so you just never get around to it, and that's fine because it's not urgent or important. But then you have like kind of these gray areas, right, where you have the stuff that is urgent. It's not really that, but it's urgent, but it's not really that important. Then you have the stuff that's really important, but it's not that urgent. And what usually happens is like this urgent stuff that's not that important causes you to kind of drop off these things that are important but not urgent. And for a kid, when it comes to nap time, whatever they happen to be doing in that moment is the most urgent and important thing in the world. It could be anything, right? It could be playing a game. It could be imagining something. It could be telling a story. It could be asking a question. My daughter, my 4-year-old, she doesn't nap anymore, but she could if she wanted. Like the gift is there. She could do it, but she doesn't want to. When she used to nap, when we would get her ready for nap time, we called her the filibuster, because she just could talk and talk and talk, and she would just be like this filibuster holding off the thing, and like she would always be like, I just have one more question, I got to tell you one more question, and like there was always one more question. Whatever that question was so urgent and so important that this really important thing called napping would kind of get set aside in her mind. And we're here and we've been in this series called To Hell with the Hustle. And we have been taking a hard look at the hurry and the hustle that's just part of our world. And we've been observing how hurry and hustle, they are detrimental. They're detrimental to our souls, to our relationships. They're detrimental to just our own sense of peace and happiness. And of course, even more importantly, they're detrimental to the mission of God being fulfilled through our lives. That hurry and hustle, they come in and they just kind of choke out our productivity for the kingdom. And so we've been looking at different practices and disciplines and strategies to keep the hurry and hustle at bay. And we talked about things like simplicity and solitude and silence and fasting, just practices that Christians have been using for 2,000 years to keep the hurry and hustle at bay. And today we're going to be talking about one of these practices, and it is a gift. It is such a gift that God has given to his people. A gift to root out hurry and hustle in our lives. A gift that tethers us to healthy rhythms of work and rest. A gift that reminds us where we come from and where we're going. And that gift is Sabbath. And it's not super popular to talk about Sabbath in Christian circles these days, and for understandable reasons. Like the kind of role that Sabbath plays in the life of the Christian is admittedly murky, right? It's not black and white. Like for the Jewish people, Sabbath was black and white. Like you observe the Sabbath forever. Like as long as that covenant is alive, you observe the Sabbath, you don't break it. In fact, not only was it a command in the law, like it wasn't just one of the 613 commands. You guys know the Sabbath shows up in the 10 commandments. Like it's one of the top 10 commandments, keep the Sabbath. Don't forget the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath. Observe the Sabbath. It makes it right in there. Number 4 in God's list of like the top 10 things to never not do. And then fast forward today and we don't do it. And it's like, well, we don't set aside any of the other 10 commandments. Why do we set aside Sabbath? But at the same time, there's good reason why we as Christians set aside Sabbath and we don't practice it in the same way. And part of that has to do with just even Jesus' attitude toward the Sabbath. You read through the Gospels and Jesus practiced the Sabbath, but he definitely pushed up against it. And he definitely challenged sort of like the religious attitude about the Sabbath. He definitely seemed to have a much more lackadaisical interpretation of Sabbath than what the Old Testament law seemed to indicate. And then you get to the Apostle Paul in Colossians, and he actually talks about the Sabbath, and he says, therefore, don't let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink. So he's talking about eating kosher here. So what's going on in Colossians is, in Colossae at the time, is there's Jewish Christians and then there's Greek Christians. They're coming together, and the Jewish Christians are like, we need to eat kosher, and the Greek Christians are like, we don't need to do that. And they're kind of judging one another. And he's saying, don't judge each other about what you eat or drink, or with regard to religious festivals, a new moon celebration, or a Sabbath day. He throws Sabbath in there, and then he says these things are a shadow of things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. So Paul here explicitly puts the Sabbath, the practice of Sabbath, and kind of the law around Sabbath into a category that we often refer to as the ceremonial laws. Things like making sacrifices at the temple, right? We don't make sacrifices at the temple anymore because those are a shadow of things to come. They were just pointing ahead to Jesus' sacrifice, which is replaced all of that. So we don't need to keep going and killing animals. We have that sacrifices that's been done. It was a shadow. And Paul says that Sabbath was actually a shadow of something to come. And this is why for the last 2,000 years, most Christians have understood that the laws around Sabbath don't apply to New Testament Christians. Right? So most Christians for the last 200 years have understood that Sabbath and all of that, the command does not apply to New Testament Christians. But you know what else most Christians for the last 2,000 years have done? Practiced some version of Sabbath rest. So they understood that it wasn't a command anymore, a binding command, and yet the practice of Sabbath rest has been pretty normal for most Christians for the last 2,000 years. Now, they didn't call it Sabbath. They distanced themselves from that pretty early on. They called it the Lord's Day. They moved it to Sunday because that's the day Jesus rose from the dead. But they had a day set aside holy to the Lord's Day. And on that day, they would rest from their work. In fact, even in our world, we still see some remnants of this. Like, have you ever been to a place where they have blue laws? So Bergen County, New Jersey, anybody familiar? Bergen County, it's less than 30 miles from here. And today, stores aren't going to be open because they still have blue laws in effect. Like Garden State Plaza, which is a mall comparable to Roosevelt Field, will not open today. Like imagine if Roosevelt Field was closed every Sunday. Like imagine the money sitting on the table left off because it wasn't allowed to open. Because in Bergen County, New Jersey, they still have these blue laws held over from previous generations. And it's not closed on Saturdays. This wasn't a Jewish thing. This was a Christian thing that for the most part, Sunday was a day set aside to the Lord there where you'd rest and you'd practice some version of Sabbath rest. And here's one thing I know for certain. That nobody here in this room today is eating Chick-fil-A for lunch, right? And why is that? It's not because Chick-fil-A is being like crazy and doing this, weird thing. No, they're actually just holding on to something that's been kind of traditional for most Christians throughout the last 2,000 years. And it's really been in the last 50 or 60 years that we've thrown off this idea because we're the generation that says we don't want structures, we don't want traditions, and we don't want rules that confine us. And there's good reason for that because some of the ways these things were enforced, it was legalistic and it was oppressive, and like that's not what it's meant to be. But here we are, and we stand up with Jesus and we remind people, no, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Like we weren't made for the Sabbath. We don't need to practice this, right? But we cling to the second half of Jesus' statement, right? Where he says that man wasn't made for the Sabbath. And I think we miss the first part, where he actually says the Sabbath was made for man. Right? Sabbath was made for you guys, for humanity, as a gift from God, right? He made this just for you. Last week on Father's Day weekend, I woke up on Saturday morning, my daughter coming into the room, and she's, Daddy, happy Father's Day. And she rushed in, she was so excited to show me this card that she made her. This is me. It looks just like me. She said, I made this just for you. Made this just for you. When it comes to the Sabbath, I have this picture of God being like, oh, guys, I made this just for you. I made this special day, this set apart day, this holy day just for you to rest and delight. It's a gift just for you. What I hope to do this morning is show you that Sabbath really is a gift. That it is a gift for God's redeemed image bearers to rest in his provision and delight in his promises. Right? It is a gift. It's a special gift crafted by God himself for his redeemed image bearers to rest in his provision and delight in his promises. I want to take some time to just break this down for you, and then we'll get into some practical details. But first off, Sabbath is a gift. In fact, before Sabbath was a law, it was a gift. It started as a gift. The very first time Sabbath shows up in the Bible, now you might be familiar that it's pointed to, it's kind of alluded to, it's hinted at in the creation narrative. God creates, and on the seventh day he rested. It's kind of hinted there. But the first day Sabbath proper shows up in the Bible, it's not in the law. It's in a story in Exodus 16. And in Exodus 16, we're told that the Israelites were coming out of Egypt. They just crossed through the Red Sea on dry land, and they get to the wilderness, and they're looking around, and they're like, there's nothing to eat here. This is not going to go well for us. Maybe we should go back to Egypt and eat there. And God shows up. He's like, no. I'm going to feed you. I'm going to feed you. I'm going to actually rain down bread from heaven. And here's the deal. I'm going to send bread every day for you guys to gather up and eat. But don't store any of it for the next day. If you try to, it's just going to spoil. And sure enough, people tried to gather for the next day, and it would spoil. So they would go out each day. And it says that each morning, everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. And on the sixth day, it says, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person. And the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. Now, Moses knows why, right? And the way the story is told in Exodus 16, Moses already knows why they went out on day 6 and there was twice as much. But as it plays out in the story, nobody else did. Like, they didn't know. They just woke up one morning. He's like, ta-da, there's twice as much. You're like, wow, this is interesting. What's going on here, right? I love the way one commentator talks about it. He says, the motif of the people's discovery adds one more charming element to the joyous wonder of the manna. God gives Israel, as it were, a surprise party. It's like, surprise, here you go. So the leaders are like, there's twice as much, what's going on? So they go to Moses, and it says that Moses said to them, this is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of Sabbath rest. All right, this is where it shows up for the first time. That this is going to be a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake, boil what you want to boil, save whatever is left, and keep it until morning. Hey guys, I gave you this surprise abundance today so that tomorrow you get to wake up and just rest in my provision. You don't have to go out and do anything. Now, sure enough, people still woke up the next day, and some of them went out and tried to find some manna. They're like, oh, maybe I'll get a little extra today. And there was none. Like, there was none there. And so Moses comes back and he reiterates to them. He says, bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Right? It's a gift. God is giving you the Sabbath. That's why on the 6th day he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where they are on the 7th day. No one is to go out. So the people rested on the 7th day. It's a gift. Before it became a command, and yes, it became a command, and it was kind of written into the Old Testament law, but before any of that, it was just a gift that God was giving to his people. And fast forward 2,000 years after Jesus, the command no longer applies to us, but it's still a gift. Jefferson Bethke, he's the author of the book, To Hell with the Hustle. That's actually where we got the name for the series from. But he wrote, I always find it funny when one of the first things out of people's mouths when you start talking about Sabbath is, but do we have to? Do we have to? To which the answer is, of course not. But do you have to go to Disneyland? He's from the West Coast, so he doesn't understand that over here. Disney has a whole world. But he says, do you have to go to Disneyland? Do you have to watch Back to the Future? Do you have to eat a 3 Michelin star luxury dinner that someone else paid for? Of course not. These are things you get to do. Now, I I don't get to do the 3 Michelin star restaurants that somebody else wants to pay for. I don't know what world he lives in. But the idea is here, if somebody is offering you something like that, if somebody says, hey, I want to take you to dinner, and I want it to be the best dinner, I'm going to pay for it, you don't be like, oh, do I have to? No, you say, I get to, right? And for 2,000 years almost, 1,500 years or so, it was a law. It was a law in Israel that they had to practice the Sabbath. But before it was a law, it was a gift. It was an opportunity, gift that God was giving to his redeemed image bearers. And it's a gift that I think we can still tap into as his redeemed image bearers. As I mentioned before, Sabbath shows up in the 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments show up in 2 places in the Old Testament. They're recorded in Exodus 20 and in Deuteronomy 5. And if you put them side by side, it's nearly like identical. The list nearly identical word for word as you go through all of it. Until you get to the Sabbath commands. And then there's like a little bit of differences. It's actually one of the longer commands in the 10 Commandments, and there's a little more details given there than really any of the other commands. But there's little differences, and for the most part, they're pretty similar. So like it starts off, and the Deuteronomy one's like, observe the Sabbath. This one's like, remember the Sabbath, and like, keep it holy. And this one's, keep it holy. And so you can kind of see maybe a little bit of difference. And then they continue on, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. Look, it's identical. 6 days you labor and do all your work. They're identical there. And then it goes on it you shall not do any work, not do any work. They really say the same thing. It's just Deuteronomy uses a few more words to say it here. But when it gets to the why, when it gets to this next part, when it gets to the why, that's where they differ the most. And look what it says. In Deuteronomy, it says, remember, this is why you're going to practice the Sabbath. Remember, you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. So in Deuteronomy, it points to God's redeeming work, bringing them out of Egypt. And then in Exodus, it says, in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that's in them. But he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and he made it holy. In Exodus, it actually points back to the creation, or the why behind the Sabbath actually points all the way back to creation. That God, as creator, made the world, and then he rested on the 7th day. And we, as image bearers, we bear his image, we do our work, and then we rest in it on the 7th day. This is actually a way that we identify as image bearers, and God is giving them this gift, this Sabbath gift, as a way of drawing their attention back to the garden. Back to life before the curse, like the way things were supposed to be. Sabbath is a picture of the way things were supposed to be. It's a reminder that our identity is as image bearers, that we created in the image of God. It's a reminder for us. Sabbath is a gift. It's a reminder for us that we are first and foremost human beings, not human doings, right? So that's the Exodus passage. It points back to the creation, how we're image bearers, but the Deuteronomy passage talks about Egypt and slavery and how they've been redeemed out of slavery. And you know who doesn't get a day of rest? Slaves. Slaves don't get to rest. For 400 years, the Israelites have been in slavery, which means everybody that Moses is talking to, his whole audience, they know nothing but slavery. Their parents knew nothing but slavery. Their grandparents knew nothing but slavery. All they know is a world of slavery. They know nothing of rest. They know nothing of delight. But now they're free. And God says, no, guys, I'm going to give you Sabbath as a gift to remind you that you are free. That you're not enslaved anymore to the powers of Egypt. You are my redeemed people. And Sabbath is an opportunity for them to live in the reality that we are free. But it begs a question for us, because I think for some of us who might be sitting here, you might be thinking, like, Sabbath sounds fun, but I couldn't do that. Right? For the Israelites, for 400 years, they couldn't do Sabbath if they wanted to. Like, it wasn't an option. I think for many of us here, we might sit back and say, I can't take a day and just rest, do nothing but rest one day a week just to rest and delight. I can't pull that off. But you realize that's the language of slavery. As one author put it, he said, Egypt is alive and well in our culture. And there are gods that want to enslave us. They want to oppress us. They want to trap us back into that mindset of slavery. And God gave us the Sabbath, this practice of Sabbath, this gift to stand up against these gods. But we live in a world where, our careers are so demanding. Our careers are so demanding that rather than our careers serving us, we are serving them, right? We have social pressure to provide every material good and every opportunity for success and every experience for ourselves and our families, and this pressure to just do more and provide more and more and more and not hold anything back. This pressure is so great that we become enslaved to our schedules. We have a cultural addiction to busyness, so much so that sometimes if you do take a day to just rest, to do nothing, to just rest, you get that whisper in your ear that says, you can't just do nothing. What are you, lazy? What are you, weak? How selfish, how irresponsible. Because culturally, like just in our society, there's an addiction to busyness. We have codependencies in our lives where we're just constantly looking around for needs that need to be met, the next need that we're gonna meet, because our worth and our value is tied to our usefulness, our ability to show like, oh, we could be helpful. We have an allergy to the word no, right? We're allergic to the word no. So we say yes to every ask, because we don't wanna disappoint anybody. Sometimes we're too proud when we're in a place where, practically speaking, we actually can't afford to take a day off. We're too proud to ask for help. And these gods of our society, they enslave us. But here comes God, and he says, I have a gift for you. A gift, so that one day a week, you can stand up and you can kind of put your fist up and say, I am not a slave. I'm not a slave to the pattern of this world. I'm not a slave to my career. I'm not a slave to social pressures. I'm not a slave to other people's opinions. I'm not a slave to consumerism. I'm not a slave to my stuff. No, I am a child of God. And I have one master, and his name is Jesus. And my master, he's gentle, and he's humble of heart. And he invites me into his rest. Yeah, Sabbath gets to be this weekly reminder that we are not slaves. We get to resist the world, the flesh, the devil that wants to tell us, no, you need to do. And we just get to be his redeemed image bearers. It's a gift for us to rest and delight. And not simply rest and delight, but to rest in his provision and delight in his promises. To rest in his provision and to delight in his promises. The word Sabbath means to just cease, like stop, freeze. Stop, don't move, do nothing. Like that's what Sabbath means, you just rest. But look how the extent of the command. It says, on it you shall not do any work. Okay, we got that part. Neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, or your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your town, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Like, you see how comprehensive this is? It's so deep that God is saying, no. I don't just want you to stop working. I want you to like cut yourself off from productivity in every possible way. Like, you are just going to sit and be for this one day. You will not be productive. It's like God pulls out his Eisenhower matrix and he says, there's one thing today that is urgent and important. That is to do nothing. Just rest. Just rest in my provision. Of course, for the Israelites, God demonstrates it first with his provision, that double portion. He says, just rest. I've already provided. Just rest. But for us as followers of Jesus, it has an even deeper meaning, because for the Israelites, God provided manna from heaven to satisfy their stomachs. But we have something way better. We don't have manna from heaven. We have the true bread that comes from heaven. That's what Jesus called himself. He said, I'm the true bread that comes from heaven. It doesn't satisfy our stomachs. He satisfies our souls, who saves us, redeems us. And we get this weekly opportunity to sit in that reality, to embody that with our lives and say, I'm going to rest in the finished work of Jesus. I'm going to rest from all my work as a reminder, as a sign that I am resting from I am resting in the finished work of Jesus. I am resting in the reality that I am saved by grace through faith, not by works, right? And we're not just saying it, we're living that for a whole day to just say, this is who I am. I am his. I am safe. I am secure. I am provided for by the provision of a sovereign God. Of course, it's hard because things are going to pop up into our minds that feel really important and urgent on Saturday. Like it happens to me. And one of the things that's been helpful for me is I'll take that, and then what I do is I tend to think about Holy Saturday. You know Holy Saturday? It's the day between Good Friday and Easter Sunday. You know what happened on Holy Friday or Holy Saturday? Nothing. Like absolutely nothing happened that day. In a lot of ways, it was like the last of the Old Covenant Sabbaths, right? Because that's when the Old Covenant comes to an end. The last of the Old Covenant Sabbaths. And it's like the Trinity got together and said, hey guys, what do you want to do on Saturday? I think we're just going to rest. I could be reading too much into it, but I don't think it's a coincidence that Jesus died on a Friday and rose on a Sunday. I don't. He could have died on Friday and rose on Saturday, and it would have been just as miraculous, and we would all been like, whoa, that's amazing. You rose from the dead. Let's worship you. All that would have worked, but he doesn't. Jesus dies on Friday. Saturday rolls around. You're like, yeah, we're good. Like, if anything seemed like urgent and important, you'd think it'd be raising Jesus from the dead. That seems pretty important, pretty urgent. And God's like, yeah, it can wait till tomorrow. What? I think let's get on. No, it can wait till tomorrow. That attitude, like just the knowledge of God's sovereignty that comes from his unhurried pace, that he could just wait, that Jesus can just lay there lifeless for a whole day. And God is not in a rush. He's not in a hurry to bring it out because he's in control. And for me, when those things come into mind, I'm like, I need to do that. This is urgent. This is important. I can just sit back. Wait, no. No, I'm resting not in my own provision and my own strength. I'm resting in the provision of the Creator God who sustains all things and who has the power to overcome death. And he's not in a rush because he's holding all the cards. For us, we get to rest in his provision. And Sabbath becomes an actual, like a lived experience of us saying, I'm going to rest in his provision. It becomes this marker in our lives, checkpoint every 7 days. But we don't just rest, we also delight, right? So Sabbath is rest, but it's also about delight. When the scholars talk about God resting on the seventh day, so God creates it, they talk about the rest, not being like resting from his work in the sense of like, oh man, that was 6 like rough days. I just need to like, I don't know, take a break, catch my breath, drink some water. Like that was a lot of work. Like that's not the kind of rest that it speaks of in Genesis. When God rested from his work, it's actually God resting in his work. So the picture that comes to mind is like, imagine a carpenter building a chair. So he's working on this chair and he builds this chair. And at the end of like a week, when he finishes the chair, he just sits in it. It's like, I'm done. I finished. I can just sit and I can rest in the work. Or the other image that comes to mind is like God preparing a fine meal. That he's doing all the work and he's measuring everything out and he's doing it just perfectly and he's slaving over this meal. And then on day 7, he sits and he just savors this meal that he crafted. It's about sitting and savoring. That Sabbath for us is a day of rest, but it's also a day to sit and savor the goodness of God and his creation. And we don't just sit and savor creation as an end in itself. We actually hold on to these good things in this world as little signposts reminding us of where we're going. That it's a taste of the new heaven and the new earth. Right? Remember before Paul talked about Sabbath being a shadow of things to come. And the writer of Hebrews, he says there's a Sabbath rest that remains for us. Like there's a future Sabbath rest. And he's talking about the new heaven and the new earth when everything's restored. Like that's a kind of Sabbath rest we can't even wrap our minds around. But he's saying what we get to do once every week is just kind of envision that, to just kind of picture that in our lives for just a moment. To enjoy the goodness of life, not simply as an end in itself, but as a reminder of where we're going. See, the American dream says, get as much as you can, do as much as you can, experience as much as you can, so that you can bring heaven into earth, into your everyday life, that you can experience heaven on earth in your everyday life. And you don't have to get very old before you realize that's just not going to happen. So what do? We say, all right, I'm not going to get heaven on earth for me, but maybe I can provide it for my kids. So we work really hard. We try to get all this stuff that maybe we could provide heaven on earth for them. If you haven't gotten there yet, it's not going to work. So what God says, no. What I want you to do is I want you to actually work 6 days out of the week. I want you to work hard. I want you to make sacrifices. I want you to work to bring heaven on earth for the world around you. I want you to bring the kingdom of God into the world. And it's going to require sometimes sacrifices and even suffering along the way. I want you to do that 6 days a week. But one day, every 7 days, one out of every 7 days, what I want you to do is I want you to sit and savor and delight in what's good here, to be reminded of where you're going. That this is a picture. I think God really does want us to have like a day that kind of looks a little bit like heaven. A day to delight in. Dan Allender, he says, the Sabbath is an invitation to enter delight. The Sabbath, when experienced as God intended, is the best day of our lives. Without question or thought, it is the best day of the week. It's the day we anticipate on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and the day we remember on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Sabbath is the holy time where we feast and play and dance and have sex. I did not add that. That was his original. Sing and pray and laugh and tell stories and read and paint and walk and just watch creation in all of its fullness. Right? Imagine having a day like this every 7 days. A day where you rest in God's provision and you delight in his promises so fully every 7 days. Imagine doing that for a whole year, having 52 of them a year. Imagine 5 years from now. Imagine 10 years from now when you've accumulated 500 Sabbath days that look like this. How would that shape you? How would that change your experience the other 6 days? Walter Brueggemann, he says, people who keep Sabbath live all 7 days differently, and it's true. That when we practice Sabbath well, not just a day off, but a day to actively rest in God's provision and delight in his promises, you're going to live every day differently as a result. So what does Sabbath look like practically for us today? The reality is it's not a law, right? It's not a command, and so it's going to be different for different people and how you work that out. But I do want to give you just some practical tips to get you started. First off, I think for most Christians, most followers of Jesus, Sunday is the best day, right? Very early on in church history, we already saw that they moved it. Like even in the book of Acts, they were already moving the Sabbath practice to Sunday for the Lord's people. Because of course, if we're trying to, as part of our Sabbath, to kind of have this picture of what heaven's like, is there any picture better than gathering with the saints in praise to God? Like having corporate worship be a part of your Sabbath is awesome. Personally, I say this kind of, hypocritically. Personally, I don't Sabbath on Sunday because Sunday is kind of like a work day for me. And it's hard to rest today for me. But for you guys, I would encourage you. And I know some of you, like the degree to which you serve today, today can't be a day of rest, and I get that. But for most of you, I would encourage you, try to make it Sunday. Personally, I do sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, and I think the sundown thing is like going sundown to sundown is great. I'd heard this advice from others, and I think it's been great because it gives you like an evening, just practically speaking, it gives you an evening to kind of rest and celebrate and delight in things, knowing that the next morning you don't have to do anything but rest some more and delight. Like you don't have to wake up and get back into the world. And so that's been great for me, something you might want to consider. I would say stack your chores. All right, when we talk about resting on the Sabbath, I'm not just talking about resting from your 9 to 5 job. I mean resting from your work. Like don't be productive. Don't mow your lawn. Like don't do chores around the house. Don't do laundry. Like stack those things on other days. And one of the great things about having this rhythm of Sabbath is it gives you a freedom to kind of push deeper on some other days, knowing like, oh, I have a day of nothing coming, and nothing but delight coming ahead. And so plan around that. Sometimes the question of like, what is work will come up. Like, what constitutes work? And again, we're not under law, so it's kind of for you to figure out. Like for me, I literally just ask myself, like, does this feel like work? And if the answer is yes, I say no. Uh, like it's that simple. Like, and so I just say no to things. Not everyone's going to understand you saying no to things, and that's fine. But to just kind of have that practice of saying, no, I'm just not going to work today. I'm not going to be productive today. Today is a day of resting in God's provision and delighting in his promises. And I would say be prepared for it. Like this was a practice with the Israelites with their Sabbath. They would prepare for the Sabbath the day before, and I would prepare to delight. So have a plan of how you're going to delight that day and how you're going to rest that day. Like go in with a plan, hold it loosely because, that's good. But having an idea, with my family, we alternate who gets to pick where we're going to go for breakfast. And so yesterday, Kara got to pick. So we went to IHOP and we delighted in pancakes and crepes and stuff at IHOP. And a lot of times I'll prepare in advance and I'll have like playgrounds in mind that we're going to go because, or museum trips or something. Because for my kids, I want them to grow up thinking that Sabbath is the best day of the week. Like I do want them to genuinely see this as a day to rest and delight in. Now, life stage plays a role. My kids are young. I have a baby, a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. So like actually resting, but like Lindsay and I will plan to trade off. So like yesterday I took the kids for a couple hours so she could take a nap and then she took them and working out those arrangements. But you don't have to have this pressure on you to like figure it out perfectly. It is a practice, something you can develop. And here's the great thing. You get 52 chances a year. And if it doesn't go well one week, you're like, all right, well, do it again next week. You get to try things. All right, like when my kids are young enough that we've avoided the whole sports thing so far. But like if yesterday I had to go watch Kara play soccer for an hour, I think that would be both restful and delightful. But if I had to go watch Kara play soccer for like 17 hours at a tournament, I don't think that would be restful or delightful. And so I don't know as a family, like if we're going to do that sort of thing. I don't know if that's going to be part of our world. It's too early for me to say. Maybe when I get there, I'll change my mind. But one thing I do know is you probably can't do everything you're currently doing and practice Sabbath. There's something we'll have to give. There will be a cost to it. For instance, with us, when Simon, my younger son, was on his way into the world, we realized, we got to get a bedroom for Kara. We don't have that. We need to move her out of the nursery, get her into a bedroom. So we started working on that. But here's the problem with house projects when you Sabbath. I just lost 52 working days to like work on the house and get stuff done. So it really slowed down the project. I guess I could have just like simplified the project, but that's not how I roll. So we just dragged it out. And so like we had Simon's birthday a few weeks ago. He's 1. And like a week before that, Kara moved into her new room. So it took us a whole extra year to actually get it done. And we had to get Simon out of our room earlier. So Simon did go into the nursery, which meant Kara just kind of got pushed to the basement until she like slept on the couch or the trampoline or in like a sleeping bag on a yoga mat on the floor for several weeks in the basement. Don't judge me as a parent, but the whole point of all of it, we could have avoided all of that if I just decided, no, I'm just going to work on the room on Saturdays, and we could have made different plans, but we didn't, and there was a cost to that, and I'm way okay with the cost. But the reality is there's a cost to it, which is why I think for many of you, you're going to opt to say, not right now. And I don't say that with judgment. I say that because that's what I did. Like 10, 12 years ago, we brought out a pastor to our Revive LI network, that network of pastors that we help run here on Long Island. We brought him out, and he gave this really awesome, compelling talk about Sabbath. I'm like, that sounds great. And you know what I did? Nothing. But fortunately, a couple years later, I was at another conference in the city, and the same pastor came, and he gave the same compelling talk about Sabbath, so I had another chance. And thankfully, that time, I did nothing. Because I don't need it, I can't do whatever, all the excuses. But then, in 2020, when the world started to just fall apart, and there was just things going on everywhere, inside the church, outside the church. And I was getting squeezed, and I realized, as my soul was getting squeezed, I didn't like what was coming out, and I realized I need to do something. And I picked up this book, Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and I read it. I read his chapter on Sabbath, and I said, this is it. This is the thing that I need to introduce into my life. And I did. I haven't been practicing it perfectly, and that's fine, because I get a new chance every week to do it. But man, it has been a lifeline for me. over the last few years. Of course, I'm not perfect. I'm working through things. Some of you might know me, and you're like, Trevor, I don't know, you're not that great. I don't know if Sabbath's working for you. But I promise you, the man who's standing before you today is way better than the man who would be standing before you if I didn't have Sabbath over the last few years. And what I really hope is that for you, you're going to talk with your family, you're going to figure things out so that a few years from now, you're going to be talking to somebody and you're going to be telling them, oh man, Sabbath has been such a gift to me and my family, this gift to remind us that we are God's redeemed image bearers, to just rest in his provision and delight in his promises. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for this gift. We thank you that you are that good, that powerful, that generous, that we can genuinely just rest in your provision, delight in your promises, knowing that what is to come is so good. Thank you for creating a world where Sabbath is part of your plan, where we aren't slaves, but we are children. We're co-laborers who get to work 6 and delight 7. God, and we look forward to that future Sabbath rest that is to come. But I pray for everyone in this room that you would give them wisdom and discernment to figure out how to embrace that practice now, to make it part of their rhythm, God, so that they could just move one step closer to a life that is unhurried, a life that is resting in you, not just on Sabbath, but a life that is resting in you 7 days a week. We pray this in Jesus' name.